There was a night where we turned away Lindsay Lohan. I was one of the first people to get a scanner, which is really dating me, how old I am. You've got to feel like you're already part of something and that you're all pulling in the same direction. The service and the product isn't good enough. You talk about like there being over 400 pubs that closed last year. You walk into an average central London boozer around the corner from here and it won't be clean enough. They can get away with it usually because they're massive, gigantic pub groups. Whereas when you're running a smaller business, you can be so much more agile and so much more on it. One of the things I love about the industry is its permanence. People are always going to want to go out, spend time with friends and family in a nice hospitality setting.
Welcome to the latest interview. This is the Live, Learn, Laugh podcast. I've got a good contact of mine today, Matt Fleming, who's behind and built and scaled some of the most exciting hospitality businesses in the UK. These include Soho House, Vagabond Wines, and most recently Pool House, which is backed by the founders of both Topgolf and Putt Shack. Today we're going to be talking about how you grow hospitality brands in a tough, fragile sector, and how Matt successfully raised capital and grown teams and become a very prominent figure in the industry. So welcome.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
So from an early stage, you've been an entrepreneur really since your teen years, haven't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've always been doing something. I think the earliest memories of any kind of seeds of entrepreneurialism in me was starting to collect conkers near my house and flog them at school. And then also I think I was one of the first people to get a scanner, which is really dating me, how old I am. So started an illicit bus pass copying business, which got us into a little bit of trouble at one point. But I've always been doing something, yeah.
And obviously, since I've known you, you've always been very keen on hospitality itself, be it, running really cool bars back in the day, to now, obviously, doing all sorts of things, in really quite famous names.
Mm. Yeah, hospitality it just suits me really, really, really well. I was attracted to it from as early as I can kind of imagine, and my first step into it was after doing loads and loads of jobs. As I said, I was always doing something. I was also had paper rounds and was working, stacking shelves at Boots and doing really just trying to get any cash together that I could. Yeah. And then when I was 17, there was a pub near me that was being taken over by, I think, Six Continents Retail at that point, formerly Bass, and they were turning it into an O'Neill's. And at that time, that felt like the coolest thing possible if I could go and work at this O'Neill's. And I've just always been attracted to that energy that hospitality has and how varied it is. Like every day is different. You've got different crowds of people walking through the door each day, and it fits me really, really well.
Yeah, and I suppose working in a bar, it gives you a 360 view of everything, doesn't it? You see the cleaner in the morning and you see the investor and the founder in the evening to tell them how it's going, and a whole range of other things during the day. So how do you think that's shaped your leadership style? Because you really have to deal with everyone and everything, don't you?
Yeah, I think my leadership style is constantly evolving, and I think unfortunately the best learnings that you get are when you're making mistakes.
Yeah.
And you're looking back on what you've done that day and you're like, I could have done that slightly different or slightly better. But I think at its core, what's important to the people on the front line, having been one of those people and spent an enormous amount of time working bars and restaurants and everything else, what's important to those guys on the front line is also what is or should be important to the business as a whole. That you've got to have a value alignment between what you're doing and what the business is doing, and you've got to feel like you're already part of something and that you're all pulling in the same direction if you want to be successful. And when you have that and you have engaged teams at the front line, then that's when you're really going to win.
So you recently done an exciting project for Pool House, which I think is due to open before Christmas. They've raised a lot of money. They're successful owners behind the concept, and we're seeing a rise, I think, in more competitive socialising with Sixes, the cricket brand, and the various golf brands and darts brands that are out there. Obviously that's been a very exciting endeavour, right? And
absolutely, yeah. Pool House is going to be huge. It actually opens just after Christmas, and it's the scale of it is something pretty crazy. I mean, we already mentioned that they raised 25 million quid last year. A massive portion of that is going into the first venue near Liverpool Street. and the pool house's positioning is going to be really, really interesting to see how the market reacts to it. Typically, competitive socializing doesn't need to be super on pitch because it's destination. So people will travel for a bit to get to it, to have that experience. Pool House have got a 21,000 square foot site right by Liverpool Street Station. Could not be more prime. And again, a lot of competitive socializing is kind of like spit and sawdust. It's a bit ropey, but it's for the experience, so it's fine. Whereas they're putting a huge amount of money into this first site. I mean, more than 12 million of capex is going into this site. It's going to be something absolutely spectacular. And it's all based around the Jolliffe Brothers gamified pool concept, which is similar to what they did with golf for Top Golf and what they did with putting mini golf for Putt Shack.
Yeah,
it's going to be spectacular.
So lots of our clients who have staff have really been struggling, in the last 12 months. Obviously, wage inflation. We've had food inflation from the Ukraine war. We've had COVID, which was obviously miserable for the sector. Like, what do you think are the biggest challenges for the hospitality sector today?
I mean, the things you mentioned right now are hugely top of mind. Pubs are closing, for example, at an inordinate rate, like more than 400 last year. It is those cost increases that's driving that. If you've got a 20% increase over the last few years in what it costs you to buy the goods that you're making your products with, and your dishes and your drinks with, and you've got a similar increase in labour, you haven't been able to raise pricing to keep up with that inflation. And so the only place that hits is your bottom line. And years ago, a fair few, even 5 years ago, performing at like a 20% EBITDA level was considered like that business is great, that's doing really, really well. Now, I would say that's come right down. If you're doing 10 or 12%, then you're doing really, really well in this environment.
Yeah, I would say 20% is really a market-leading EBITDA across most sectors that we see. We've noticed, for instance, like friends of mine who own Central London restaurants are really struggling with staff, and they're losing chefs for 50p an hour around the corner to other more famous brands. And obviously there's been quite a lot of press I've noticed recently about how a family of four can't go out for lunch for less than £100, right? And that makes the press, and it's like a big hullabaloo. But in reality, if it's costing the restaurant £85 to seat them, it's a pretty unfair press in my view, because actually cooking at home's gone up as well, right? And it's not like this is just the pizza or the Nando's or the or the posh restaurant that's putting up prices.
Well, you've got a lot of competition. That you're always in competition with the other people doing what you're doing in whatever location you are. But more now, you are competing with actually trying to get people out of their houses. You're competing with people who don't want to spend that money on a regular basis. What happens usually in that situation is that people will still go out. They'll go out just less often. And when they do go out, they really want it to feel special. They really want, it's much more of an occasion than just like popping out for a lunch. If you can only afford to go out once or twice a week versus 5 times a week or that in a month, you really need to make sure that the experience you're delivering for people is just top notch. What's also true though is that people will spend a little bit more. So rather than going out twice and spending £100, they may only go out once that month. They might spend 120, 130 quid. So on the single visit, they're spending more money. And so, that does give you some opportunities to kind of make sure that you're doing something special.
Obviously, you've helped build some of the most successful brand names we've mentioned, whether it's Vagabond, that's a personal favourite of mine, Be It One, obviously very well known. So what do you think defines a great hospitality brand in your view, and what keeps them relevant? Because they change so often. People get fatigued after 5 years. Like we've seen the rise of Mr. Fogg's, haven't we, over the last 7-8 years probably. They now have so many pubs in Soho, don't they? You can't almost go down the street without a Mr. Fogg's. And it's quite a cool brand, but you can't walk in and order a pint. At the bar, they insist on you sitting down, and they're a bit awkward if you. They don't like. They don't like after work lads drinks. Right? They're more going after the couple or the the business lunch, maybe, aren't they?
Well, those guys in particular, firstly, they do a really brilliant job. They're probably some of the best in a tier of kind of, they're not quite a pub. They're really driving this kind of, it's almost like a paid experience that you're going to be immersed in this world that's completely different from the everyday life. You know, you've got actors standing outside the front in Victorian garbs, and it really is all about that transformative or transportative kind of experience. And so they're really leaning into what we were saying before. If people are going to go out and they're going to have this one experience that they might spend a little bit more at, you know, they let's give them something really special, and let's do something that they're going to want to put on Instagram, that's shareable, that's memorable, and all those bits. The basics, come back to your original question, the basics of building a good hospitality business or brand is, you know, you've got to have a great product. You've got to be serving it in a clean, comfortable environment, and you've got, that service has to be exceptional. That's like the basics. And then if you've got some iconic imagery or some iconic, you know, something to hang all that off that you can communicate through to people.
Having been part of Soho House in its prime, you know, the most iconic, you know, club, I would say, you know, the last 20 years, certainly in terms of like, you know, it's very widespread, famous, multi-club brand, isn't it? That started off in, was it Greek or Dean Street, and it's now everywhere.
Yeah.
What was it like to work there? What, you know, how do you think they've, you know, because they've had some highs and lows, I would say, from reading the press and speaking to members. Obviously, it's overall, it's a very good experience. But how do you think they've retained their clientele so well? Because, you know, a lot of my good friends have got this multi-house membership that they love and they would never give up. And how do you think, like, they've avoided the trap of like overexpansion or brand fatigue that many lifestyle groups have faced?
Well, firstly, when I worked at Soho House, I don't know if it was quite their prime in terms of it was fairly early. It was I went in the opening year of Shoreditch House, which was their fifth house. Now they've got 50, 60 globally, and all the restaurant business and Soho Home and everything else. And they've transitioned, I think, quite smoothly from, they've expanded what their brand is about in a positive way. When they first started, it was a creative bolt hole, it was a bolt hole for creatives, purely for networking. And that's why that worked. And that for the market they wanted to attack at the time, that was absolutely perfect. As they started to grow, the kind of this cool factor came in, and that really started to happen because of the exclusive nature of it, because it was hard to be a member, and because they were pretty strict in saying no to people that didn't fit the model of who they wanted to be part of this club. And that, you know, scarcity is going to be the biggest driver of interest, right? People were really excited, and it's about sticking to those principles, right? When I was managing at Shoreditch House, there was a night where we turned away Lindsay Lohan because she didn't have a membership. And that hit the press. Like that's big news, and that did so much more for us than letting Lindsay in, and then actually serving her a couple of espresso martinis or whatever. So I think being true to what your brand values are is the most important thing, but then evolving it in a way that fits that new world well. So they are now a global lifestyle brand, and they've retained enough of that cool. They've traded off it and retained enough of it. But if you ask, you know, you're saying friends of yours have been members forever. If you ask some of them, they'll be like, oh, it's not like it used to be, you know. But it's a different thing now. It's a publicly traded, or maybe it's been taken back privately, isn't it? But it's a very different entity from what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for the global sort of traveling elite, they love the fact that it's in 10 or 15 cities, don't they? And
I mean, I have just given up my membership, which is I probably shouldn't say on camera. That I was basically only using it like once a month for coffee, so it became really expensive. But
no, but you can, you know, you might go back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you founded your own concepts, you know, back from like the House of Wolf days and, you know, the Casbah days, and you've later led now sort of big corporate portfolios. What would you say is are the biggest contrast between those like environments, and, you know, what brings out the best work for you now?
I mean, the contrasts are absolutely huge. The difference from working in, I guess the largest corporation that I've worked for is Stonegate. It's the largest pub company on the planet now. And I ended up working for them because they bought Be At One, and I moved over as part of that process, part of that purchase. And I moved over knowing that it wasn't really where I wanted to be from a scale of business perspective. I love the smaller, founder-led, really the early days up to kind of like, 10, 15 sites where you're scrapping and you're really finding your home in the market. And if you're leading that business, you need to wear 10 different hats depending on what day it is. But one of the big differences for me, which feeds my preference, is that everything's so slow in a big business. Like to get anything done, the amount of people that you need to consult in order to get a decision made, to make a change that's going to affect guests is so many. There may not be a leadership meeting that needs a board meeting approval for so long, and you can't do anything without those approvals. Whereas when you're running a smaller business, you can be so much more agile and so much more on it. And I think, that keeps me excited.
And so, your time leading Be At One and later Stonegate showed like a real flair. You show a real flair for creative expansion. How do you balance like that originality with operational rigor? You still got to make a profit, haven't you? Yeah. It's great to make the fanciest cocktail that maybe takes even a very high-end barman 5 minutes to make, right? And someone comes to the bar and orders 6 different types of cocktails. It ties up a barman for 25 minutes potentially, doesn't it? And time is money, and selling bottles of beer is much more profitable, right? I'm guessing, but it's a tricky game, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, innovation it's really, really important, but it shouldn't take the place of ensuring that your core product, the thing that you do, is as good as you can possibly make it. So, in a bar setting, using the example you're giving, there's certain innovation that has to happen, like on a calendar basis. You need to be launching new menus. You need to be keeping things interesting from that perspective. But it can't replace making sure that, for example, it doesn't take 5 minutes and a super experienced bartender to just make that one drink. And that's really one of the things that was great about Be At One, and the reason why that role, it was the right time for the right business, was because the commitment to training in that business was absolute. I mean, it's well renowned as being pretty much the best bar training business that's existed in the UK since TGI's, which was its kind of the daddy was TGI's. Then you've got Be At One, you've got all these other kind of grandchildren coming off the bottom of it. But that commitment to training meant that bartenders were so skilled and they were so highly trained that they were able to adapt to new things. And when you launched a new menu, you did a lot of training, you made sure there was testing. The pass rate at Be At One, I'm not sure if it still is now, was 98% to pass any exam that we did around the training of the drinks in that business. So when you've got that culture of excellence, you then can start to change things around and test things. And that really is the thing. You've got to test. You've got to test. You do not take an estate of 50 bars and bang out at something completely different that isn't your core product without taking 1 or 2 bars and testing it for certain periods and really like looking at that data that comes back, making sure that's what your customers want.
Yeah, and I guess what someone might want in one part of the country is completely different to what someone might want in another, right? And that's also a big factor. Obviously, you see Wetherspoons like have different prices in almost every pub, don't they?
Yeah, I mean that is a real like point of scale challenge for a lot of businesses. You can be so successful in London, and it's a classic thing that happens. You have 5, 6, 7, 10 venues in London. They're going great guns. You're really, really happy. And you're like, right, let's open in Reading, let's open in Birmingham, let's open wherever. And time again, operators get up to these other places and they're like, right, we do exactly what we do here. And it just doesn't quite hit the market in the same way that it does in London. And conversely, that can happen. You might be the biggest, best thing in Manchester. You come to London thinking you're going to be, the same thing's going to happen. And, there's a million different places to go in London versus where you are. So you kind of get lost in the noise a little bit. And then you've got to be like, right, now we've got to focus on marketing and cutting through and getting out there. So yeah, it's a different set of challenges depending on what phase your business is at.
So obviously a crucial part of scaling in your sector is raising and deploying capital. Like you've been involved in several sales. So, when you've been acquired at Be At One and Vagabond, at Pool House recently, tell us a bit about Pool House firstly, but also You raised £25 million, I think, for the latest site, which is now open, I think, or about to open.
Yeah, so Pool House, I mean, that fundraising journey was eye-opening more than anything else. First of all, I think that's the largest amount of money ever raised for an independent hospitality venture in the UK.
Wow.
It's bonkers. And that wouldn't have happened without the pedigree of the founders. Having the Jolliffes behind that, who have already started Topgolf in the late 90s and built and sold it for 2.1 billion. So the best thing you can do basically is have founders that have already created a unicorn. That's my advice.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's got to be honest and it's got to make sense. And really, there's never been a harder time, I don't think, to go out and raise money for a hospitality business. Like, anybody who reads the news can see the struggles that the sector's going through, the difficulties with, a government that are not necessarily keeping the promises that they made before they got into office. And so it makes it very, very difficult. So you've got to have something that's a little bit different. You've got to be able to convince people that you have the necessary expertise between the group of people that's starting the business to really, really make it a success. And despite all of that, there are going to be lots of successes. There are going to be businesses that are being founded right now that are going to be big, that are going to be the next Soho House, that are going to be the next something. And that is something that happens out of adversity. So like you've got this really difficult period, you've got loads of bars and pubs closing all the time. But what that does is the new wave of people coming through who are used to that go, well, I've got an idea. Why, instead of having 8 people in the kitchen, why don't I design a menu where one man can do all the cooking and then I'll do this. And it forces innovation. It forces people to think of things in a different way. And you'll get another wave of successful businesses off it.
I suppose we've seen that, like with Deliveroo, the rise of all these dark kitchens, right? You think you're ordering from somewhere, but in reality, it's a shed in somewhere else, right? And so I guess you've got to separate the credible concept from a vanity project, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you see it, there's a lot of billionaires in London that can afford to fit out a restaurant for 20-25 million. It's not a big deal, but they're happy to play the 10 or 15 year payback game, aren't they? But
yeah, that doesn't cut it with raising money normally, and you've got to leave yourself headroom. Like classically, it's always been you need a 3-year payback, right, of whatever capital you're putting into the business.
Wow.
I would challenge people should be looking at that a little bit in a little bit of a softer light now, and possibly allowing that to kind of stretch a little bit further, simply because of the cost increases that we've discussed. But when you're presenting your figures in a deck or whatever you're forecasting, you need to leave yourself some headroom. If you put a deck in front of someone and say, yeah, we're going to open and week one's, we're going to be 95% of mature revenue and it's going to be fantastic. And because of that, we're going to get a 3-year payback. It kind of undermines your credibility a little bit, and it doesn't leave you room to make mistakes, which you will do.
Yeah, absolutely. You see like certain restaurants, like you can't get into them for months. Like there's one that I love going to called Baron Jacques, right? And in Romilly Street, they've opened in Borough Market. And, you have to book weeks and weeks ahead, unless you want to turn up at 5 p.m. for dinner, and I really feel like they play off that,
Yeah. That, I mean, that's a nice problem to have if you're them. I think what that speaks to more than anything is that there's a lot of doom and gloom in the headlines about the hospitality sector. But the top few % of people who are really, really excellent, and you know who they are, they've got queues around the block, like that place, like the Dishoums of this world, like the people they're just nailing it. They kind of show that there is still growth. And what I'd also say, and I don't want to throw my own industry under the bus, but I just think that for a lot of businesses, it's just the service and the product isn't good enough. You talk about like there being over 400 pubs that closed last year, but you walk into an average central London boozer around the corner from here and it won't be clean enough. The beer won't be well looked after enough. The service is cold and indifferent. And, they can get away with it usually because they're massive, gigantic pub groups that can afford to have a little bit more of a drop in revenue. But I think there's room for people to be doing things with a real focus on excellence. And I think that's a lesson that everybody could look at and take.
So going back to staffing issues, as you're aware, I invested in a business called Hospitality about a year ago, and we are, trying to make the candidate screening process and candidate ecosystem a lot more friendly for staff, because it's quite hard for a young waiter to see maybe the roadmap to becoming someone as senior as you in the sector, and where they might go in that period. Do they take a job abroad to kind of speed things up, or do you see staffing still as a huge issue? I mean, it's all over the press a lot. Especially I know there was Brexit kind of related issues with staff, but now it seems like restaurants are short all over the place. And
I think it's been one of the bigger challenges of the last few years. Brexit was probably a big turning point in it. I think most businesses now have kind of got a bit used to it. That you're used to the fact that it's not as easy. You can't just post a job advert and you've got 50 reasonable candidates coming to that job, and you get to kind of pick the best one. You've got to work a lot harder. I think you mentioned earlier that some of the struggles are like, well, the chef left because he can get £1 an hour more next door, and that happens when if you're a chef in a state restaurant and 5 doors away is another state restaurant and they're offering £1 more an hour, or the $5,000 a year, or whatever, you're going to move every time if the two restaurants are very similar. So then the goal becomes really investing in the people in your business, really engaging your teams, making them feel like they're part of something, and that the culture is strong enough that they love where they work, and it represents them and it makes them feel part of something. And so they'll at least think twice about jumping ship for that kind of smaller amount of money. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It takes investment in a really good people team. It takes really listening to your teams. But I think it's essential now.
Yeah, and maybe incentivizing the top team with kind of employee and share schemes and things like that. Do you see AI coming in more and more into your sector? Because our software allows you to screen CVs much faster, and our AI bots are able to interview people now, which cuts down the HR's time, and filters much more quickly. Do you see that as a kind of big part of the future?
Yes, I think it goes hand in hand with the cost increases that everyone's facing. You need to find innovative ways to be able to save money in certain areas. And, the rise of AI is everywhere. And there are loads of businesses like hospitality building products specifically for certain industries. And from a recruitment standpoint, the amount of effort it takes just to get one solid candidate in through your front doors, employed, everything aligned, you're looking at 30 to 40 candidates of screening to get to that stage, and that has a huge cost attached to it. So in that example, absolutely it's coming. The good thing about something like hospitality is, this is hospitality, the business, is that hospitality, the industry, is traditionally a really poor uptake of technology. I think actually it's second only to agriculture at the bottom of the list for how quickly they adopt technology. And agriculture is probably now better with drones that are seeing what seeds you need to spray and fertilizers and all the rest of it. So there's these businesses in hospitality do need off-the-shelf products and services that they can go and outsource in order to strengthen their existing people teams. The same thing will happen in sales departments. You won't need somebody to answer the phone, tell you what tables are available, and then book a table on your behalf and offer you a menu. There are some businesses out there already where that is all being run by AI, and you're just going to see a growth of that over the next few years.
Yeah, I quite like this business called Amble now, which sell premium restaurant tables at the last minute.
Right, yeah.
Because, all restaurants get cancellations on a Saturday night. And, some people cancel or no-show, don't they?
Yeah.
And Amble will send you an alert to say, do you still want that table at Scott's at 8 o'clock tonight?
Well, there's a special place reserved in hell for people who no-show to restaurants and bars. It's a particularly painful thing. And it really does hurt businesses, especially if you're an independent business that's doing something in the premium sector and you only have a certain number of covers. You got 40 covers and a table of 4 doesn't show up. 10% of your revenue has just disappeared for that evening. So, yeah, mate, I mean, I don't know Amble specifically, but it sounds like an obvious solution to that problem.
Yeah. So looking back over the brands you've scaled or exited, were there any you'd do completely differently if you were given the chance to start again? Or what principle has never changed for you that's always been consistent the whole way through?
I mean, I wouldn't change much about my career. Overall, it's been incredibly varied. I think, like anybody, there's been really big wins and there's been big losses. I think if I was going to tell like the younger me anything, it would be I'd probably invest a little bit more time when I was younger in learning, like a little bit more time in reading more and seeing what's been done by people who've gone before, because I was very much just at the forefront, learning through mistakes for a great period of my career. And the reason for that is that I feel like now in my early 40s, I have a good handle on what businesses need to make them successful, aside from exactly what the product is, but the operating system of that business and how it needs to run, and the engagement of teams and some of the things we've spoken about. And the only thing I would say is that through that, like putting a bit more focus on reading what's come before, that information's been out there. I've just learnt it through mistakes, and it's taken me a lot longer. Whereas I could have got there sooner, and that may have been super beneficial.
Yeah, but I think there's no learning like learning through mistakes. Is that? I mean, it's just absolutely the most brutal and effective way to learn.
It's definitely effective. But it's about building weapons in your armor at the end of the day. If you've got more skills, earlier in your career, you can. Who knows what other opportunities may come from being more successful in that incident.
So, what habits would you say like keep you performing at a high level?
So structure and process to me is really, really important. And the teams, we spoke about, I like to go into a smaller business. I like that stage of a business. And where I really like going in is where, for example, it's been founder led for a period of time. And then the scale of that business has meant that stress cracks are starting to show, because previously the founder's been all over the place, making sure that they're on top of all the detail. But you get to that third site, that fourth site, that fifth site, and you just can't spread yourself that thin. And that's where you fall back to the level of your systems, as the saying goes. And so having a really, really rigid, but as minimal as possible meeting structure, and from a professional sense, that is absolutely necessary. Having a really clean scorecard of data of what's coming out of the business on a weekly basis, and just really trying not to get lost in the fog of the urgent thing that's just popped up, and really, really just focusing on the long-term goals and what's important right now to get to those goals, and not getting distracted just by firefighting all the time. And then on a personal side of things, if it's just exercise is the only thing that really clears my head. So right now, cycling obsessed, having just moved to the country a couple of years ago, but previous to that, always doing some form of painful, high intensity exercise to kind of, that I find is the only thing that kind of empties the head.
I remember your 1,500 burpees in a day in COVID.
Yeah, it was 1,948 because the NHS was founded in 1948, so I did it for charity during COVID, but that's a lot of burpees. I haven't done a single burpee since then. I think I've used my quota of burpees for a lifetime.
5 hours of burpees.
5 hours of burpees non-stop. Yeah, that was rough.
So tell me, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given or book that shaped your thinking?
Books-wise, I guess, there's probably a couple. The one that I really like, that I always give, if there's a good barometer, is what I give this book to a lot of people, and it's called Radical Candor by Kim Scott.
Right.
So Kim Scott was the woman who was at the forefront for Google of AdSense, and during that period of Google, and it's all about managing the whole person, and it's about team dynamics and engagement and how to get the best out of people, and by letting them bring their whole selves to work, to put it very bluntly.
And tell me like a behind the scenes moment that sums up the madness and magic of the hospitality sector. You've probably got a number of...
I don't think we have time for, or I don't know how PG you need to be for the hospitality sector fun stories. I guess I'll give you some bullet points of some that spring to mind, but things that have happened to me. I dropped a customer's black Amex in between the cracks of the decking on the roof of Shoreditch House, so it was irretrievable, at least that day. And I guess the magic of hospitality is that after how we dealt with it, he was fine.
Yeah,
he didn't mind. He got everything for free, obviously. But yeah, he didn't. How you deal with the problem is that's really relevant to hospitality. You're going to get stuff wrong. I was once serving Elle Macpherson late night, like after hours, at a cabaret club that I used to run in the city, and it's quite cheesy, but she had an espresso martini, and I put the letter E for her name in coffee beans on the top, and then as I went up to the table to give it to her, I tripped on a step and dropped those drinks all over the person that was with her. So, and I could go on. There's so many like late night, couple of drinks after work turn into a bit of an issue in lots of scenarios, but those two.
Shoreditch House for me, I've only ever actually been once, and a friend of mine threw me in the swimming pool, and I got thrown out.
Yeah. You can't be thrown in the swimming pool. Yeah, and you get thrown in the swimming pool on your last day as well. So there's a bit of a theme there, but
great.
Yeah.
Well, it's a super exciting sector, and we all hope it continues to do well, because it's a huge part of London and UK life, isn't it? The pub culture, the restaurant culture.
It isn't going anywhere. It's just resorting itself out, and it will remain there. I think one of the things I love about the industry is its permanence. People are always going to want to go out, spend time with friends and family in a nice hospitality setting.
I totally agree. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thanks.
I'll see you again soon, no doubt.
Cheers. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.